The afternoon sun hung low over Mercer Street, casting long shadows between the parked cars and coffee shops lining the sidewalk. Julian Kane strutted down the pavement, hands buried in his pockets, earbuds blasting a mix of trap and hip-hop that he wasn't even really hearing. He thrived on the subtle tension. His confidence created that feeling of occupying more space than he had any right to, the sort of swagger that screamed, "Look at me, I own this street." He was in that zone when he first spotted the man ahead. Nothing about the figure was remarkable at first glance. An ordinary coat, worn leather bag slung over one shoulder, shoes that had seen a few years of pavement. He didn't appear threatening, nor did he seem particularly alert to Julian's presence. And that, of course, made Julian smirk. Julian's stride slowed, the smirk growing. He had an idea, a little test to reinforce his street dominance. The man was tall enough to seem confident, but Julian's gut told him he could push him, make him flinch, maybe even get a reaction for the few onlookers who happened to glance his way. As Julian approached, he leaned slightly, deliberately bumping the man's shoulder with his own. "Watch it, old man," he said, laughing loudly. "You almost got crushed by me." The man didn't flinch. He didn't even glance at Julian's shoulder. Instead, he tilted his head, calm and deliberate, the faintest trace of amusement flickering in his eyes. "Almost got crushed, huh?" he said softly. Julian's confidence didn't falter. He laughed louder, glancing around as if the street itself was waiting for this show. "Yeah, you think I should apologize, maybe bow down, or something? Come on, I'm giving you a chance to save face." People passing by slowed, sensing something off. Julian thrived on that attention. It validated him. He assumed the man would squirm under the glare, perhaps stammer a defensive response. That was how the world worked for people like him. The man simply watched, silent and unmoving. His posture was relaxed but unshakable. Julian felt a strange twitch of irritation. Who was this guy not reacting? How dare he? Then the traffic light changed, and Julian's ego decided to escalate. He pushed the man lightly, deliberately, just enough to show dominance. "Step aside, Grandpa," he jeered, smiling cruelly. The man's response was quiet but sharp, like a whisper in a crowded theater. "You're confident for someone about to regret it." Julian froze for a split second. The words hit him like a cold gust. He laughed nervously, shaking his head. "Oh yeah, and who's going to make me regret it?" The man didn't move, didn't raise his voice, didn't even tense. He simply shifted slightly to the side. Julian, used to dominating every interaction, didn't see the subtle shift coming. A small adjustment in the man's stance, almost imperceptible, caused Julian to overstep. He lost his balance, his feet slipping on the slick pavement from an earlier drizzle. It happened in an instant. Julian's coffee sloshed over the edge of the cup, splattering his shoes. His phone skidded across the sidewalk and bounced once before landing screen down. He scrambled, arms flailing, trying to grab his belongings and keep from toppling entirely. A few pedestrians gasped. Some tried to suppress laughter. Julian finally caught himself, huffing, heart pounding, the taste of humiliation sharp on his tongue. He glanced at the man, expecting perhaps a sneer, a laugh, or some form of acknowledgement. But the man only adjusted the strap of his bag and looked at Julian with calm, unbothered eyes. "I warned you," the man said softly. Julian's face flushed. What did you do?" he yelled, still catching his breath. The passer-by merely smiled faintly, a hint of irony on his lips, then continued down the sidewalk. No hurry, no gesture of aggression. The kind of composure that made Julian's entire being tense. Julian sank onto the curb, staring at the puddle of coffee around his shoes, his ruined phone, the smear of dirt from the sidewalk. His face burned hotter than the sun overhead. His pride, the one thing he had always leaned on, had crumbled in seconds. People who had passed by earlier now lingered, whispering quietly, stealing glances at Julian's discomfort. Julian scrambled to his feet, brushing himself off, muttering, trying to reclaim the dignity that had vanished. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he shouted, but the man was already gone, swallowed by the flow of the city, calm and untouchable. For a moment, Julian's embarrassment curdled into anger. How dare someone treat him this way? He had dominated every situation he entered, or at least he had thought so. The man didn't just reject his dominance, he made him stumble, lose control, and fail spectacularly without a single raised voice, a single punch. Julian kicked a trash can in frustration. The clang echoed down the empty side street. People jumped aside, whispering. Julian's chest heaved with a mixture of fury and disbelief. He hadn't been prepared for this. Weeks later, the incident became the topic of a few hushed conversations on the street, not the coffee spill, not the stumble, but the legend of a passerby who humiliated a man whose arrogance thought it ruled the pavement. No one knew the man's name, no one ever saw him again, but the story lingered, a lesson in subtlety and control. Julian's ego never recovered fully. Each time he passed Mercer Street, he scanned the crowd nervously, half expecting the calm man to reappear, to once again show him the truth. Confidence alone is worthless without awareness, and arrogance is always punished, sometimes instantly, sometimes subtly, always permanently in memory. The lesson was clear. Humility, skill, and restraint, even quiet restraint, could be more powerful than noise, rage, or bravado. Julian Kane had learned that the hard way. The street had taught him, and he would never forget it. The city had grown quieter by late afternoon. Julian Kane still sat on the curb where he had fallen, his coffee, stained shoes and scuffed pride evidence of the earlier incident. The passerby's calm composure and subtle skill replayed in Julian's mind again and again. He could almost see the faint glimmer of amusement in those eyes, the perfect balance of patience and power. Julian's phone lay face down a few feet away, cracked slightly from the fall. He picked it up, turning it over nervously, hoping for a distraction, a notification, a text, anything to remind him that the world still recognized him as in control. But there was nothing. The silence was deafening. The first thing Julian realized was how utterly powerless he had felt. Not physically, not entirely, but emotionally. He had assumed the world owed him respect, that confidence alone could make him dominate any situation. But here, on this unremarkable street, all that confidence had evaporated in a single moment, replaced by something new, awareness. He tried to shake it off. It's just some random guy, he muttered to himself. Doesn't even matter. But the words rang hollow. He could feel the heat of humiliation still crawling up his neck, and worse, he couldn't locate the source to strike back. That was when a small crowd had started to gather, people who had seen the stumble, the coffee spill, the fall. Their whispers carried just enough for Julian to hear. Did you see that? He didn't even touch him, and he tripped. What was that guy? Some kind of martial artist. I've never seen someone humiliate someone so completely without even lifting a hand. Every word stung more than the physical spill. Julian scrambled to his feet again, trying to regain a semblance of dominance, trying to assert, somehow, that he was still in control. Hey, I said I'm talking to you, he yelled down the sidewalk, scanning for the man. But there was no sign of him, no trace. The passerby had vanished as quietly as he had arrived, leaving only the memory of his calm, unshakable presence. By the time Julian had collected himself, dusted off his clothes, and tried to convince himself that the incident was trivial, a strange, unwanted realization had settled over him. The man hadn't just embarrassed him, he had revealed the truth Julian had never wanted to face. His arrogance and brashness were shallow, fragile, and ineffective against skillful composure. Julian wandered aimlessly down Mercer Street, trying to convince himself that he would never see the man again, that he would never have to admit defeat. But even as he muttered, a knot of unease formed in his chest. He kept replaying the incident, imagining how easily the man had manipulated his center of gravity, how small adjustments had caused him to stumble. It was humiliating and terrifying all at once. That evening, Julian couldn't eat. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at a glass of water he couldn't bring himself to drink. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the street, the slight tilt of the passerby's shoulders, the calm glint in his eyes. He realized he had never encountered someone who could command presence without violence, who could assert authority without aggression. The next day, Julian returned to Mercer Street, not for revenge at least, not consciously. He told himself it was to reclaim his pride, to walk past the corner without fear. But deep down, he knew he wanted answers, a chance to regain some semblance of control over the humiliation he still felt. As he approached the crosswalk, he saw movement ahead. People walking, cars stopping at the light, life going on. And then, just as before, there was the man standing calmly, adjusting the straps of his bag, eyes scanning the street like he belonged to it. Julian froze, heart pounding. The man glanced up, as if sensing Julian's presence, and then nothing. No malice, no acknowledgement beyond the faintest flicker of recognition. Julian stepped forward, hesitated, then muttered, I want to understand. The passerby finally spoke, voice low and calm, almost gentle. You already do. You understand more than you realize. Julian's jaw tightened. Why did you do that? Make me fall like that? The man smiled faintly. I didn't make you fall. You did that yourself. I merely showed you the consequence of overconfidence. Julian blinked. He had expected something dramatic, a lecture, a challenge, maybe even mockery. Instead, there was nothing but quiet clarity. The realization hit him fully. He had walked into his own mistake. His arrogance had carried him straight into a lesson, one he couldn't avoid or deny. The passerby continued, Strength isn't loud. It doesn't need to be proven with gestures, threats, or force. True strength comes from control, awareness, and the ability to act without acting out of impulse. Julian's hands trembled slightly. So, what now? Now, the man said, you decide what to do with what you've learned. Julian's mind raced. The people who had watched from the street that day, the whispers, the stifled laughter, replayed like a slow-motion film. He realized he had been the source of the spectacle, the comic relief, not because the passerby humiliated him, but because he had invited it with his own arrogance. You're not going to hit me? Julian asked hesitantly. The man shook his head. Violence isn't required to teach a lesson. You've learned one anyway. That is enough. Julian stood in silence, processing the weight of it. Every muscle in his body relaxed. For the first time that day, he felt humility seep in not as a weakness, but as clarity. He understood now why the passerby had chosen to remain calm, to act subtly, to leave him with no choice but to confront himself. The light changed. Julian stepped across the street, careful and deliberate. When he reached the other side, he turned back, expecting perhaps one last lesson, one final word, but the passerby was gone. No trace remained, only the lingering sense that a powerful presence had passed through, reshaping him without striking a blow. From that moment on, Julian Kane's behavior changed. He walked Mercer Street differently, aware of his surroundings, mindful of his actions, and cautious about arrogance. Friends noticed the shift, less swagger, less bluster, more observation. People who once feared or mocked him now saw a tempered confidence, and every now and then, when he approached that same crosswalk, he would glance to see if the man had returned. Not to confront him, not to challenge him, but to remind himself of the day when a quiet presence had shattered his ego, reshaped his perspective, and left him with a lesson he could not forget. Because sometimes humiliation doesn't come from strength, anger, or fists. Sometimes it comes from calm, controlled awareness, and the instant regret it imposes is far more lasting than pain ever could be. Julian never forgot that day. And for the rest of his life, whenever he felt arrogance rising, he remembered the quiet man on Mercer Street who had taught him that true power isn't proven by striking down others, but by standing still, letting the world reveal the consequences of its own folly.